Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to each of you. Welcome to your nation's capital, the House of Representatives, and the Subcommittee on Early Childhood, Elementary, and Secondary Education will come to order. A quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to call a recess at any time. It's a special time of year in our nation's capital, and no, not because cherry blossom season is almost upon us. For children across the country trapped in failing school districts, this is the season gather around their computers to wait and pray for a name to appear. The room is still. Parents sit quietly with bated breath. They know the next few minutes could have a profound impact on the course of their children's lives. A name appears and happiness erupts. A lucky winner has been picked. With the good fortune comes the opportunity for a student to escape an abysmal traditional public school and enroll at a school that meets his or her individual needs. This is the story of our nation's charter school lotteries. The joy in a parent's heart is when their child is accepted at one of the most foremost reasons that I support charter schools. I also recognize there's a flip side to this story. Charter schools have limited seats in the lottery system, while fare does not pan out for every family. For the smiles, there are tears. This is a sad reality, but it isn't an argument against these schools. On the contrary, it's an argument for expanding charter school access so that every child can receive a high-quality education, no matter his or her zip code. And expand they have. Charter schools are relatively new in terms of the American education system, with the first charter issued in Minnesota in 1992. They have since ridden the school choice wave to over 8,000 communities, serving nearly 4 million students across 45 states. Furthermore, charter school growth is accelerating. Enrollment doubled in the most recent decade, and 74% of parents would consider sending their child to a charter school if just given the chance. Charter school success is linked to thousands of success stories across the nation. As studies and testimonies emerge from the first class of charter schools, they've proven what we've all expected. Removing the educational bureaucracy is a boon to student achievement. Now, charter graduates have the chance to send their own children to charter schools, and I see it as the committee's role to give them the best possible chance to do it. So today, we will embark on a journey to learn more about where charter schools are, how they're benefiting students, and to get more information. With that, I yield to the ranking member for an opening statement. Ranking member.
Thank you very much, Chairman Bean. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. As recognized by the Founding Fathers, numerous Supreme Court justices, and many state constitutions, the provisions of a free, high-quality public education to all children serves a compelling community interest. And Mr. Chairman, I see your scenario not as a case for more charter schools, but as a case for making all public schools the best they can be. You know, when we invest in education, we're investing in our future. Members of this committee should understand that children, regardless of where they live or how involved their parents are, they deserve access to high-quality public education that allows them to achieve their full potential. Now, most agree that parents should have a say in their child's learning environment, and under some circumstances, this may include well-regulated public charter schools. Well-funded, transparent, and accountable public charter schools, in some instances, may be a better fit for some students. For example, Kairos PDX is a charter school in Portland. They work to dismantle structural racism, close opportunity and achievement gaps for students of color through hands-on, culturally competent teaching. But unfortunately, charter schools are not subject to the same level of oversight and accountability as traditional public schools. And as a result, we often do not know whether charter schools will provide students with benefits and any meaningful benefits. Concerningly, in many instances, charter school schemes are another way for my colleagues across the aisle to divert taxpayer dollars and community resources from already struggling public schools. Now, we must not ignore the growing number of charter schools that are operated by for-profit corporations, located in states that have lax or even non-existent oversight. According to the Network for Public Education, More than 1,100 charter schools are now run by for-profit entities, and that's more than 14% of charter schools. Prior to the Education Department's updates to the charter school program, a 2016 audit found that charter school programs run by for-profit entities in California, Florida, Michigan, New York, Pennsylvania, and Texas all lacked internal guardrails that posed risks to student learning and enabled waste, fraud, and abuse of federal funds. I also have serious concerns about the effects of charter school programs on students' civil rights. Although charter schools by law are required to honor students' and families' civil rights protections, such as individual education plans for students with disabilities, gray areas surrounding a school's legal status may leave them ill-equipped to provide every student with a legally required, fair, and equitable education. Studies show that charter schools are more segregated than traditional public schools. In addition, students may be rejected, unnecessarily disciplined, or expelled for reasons that would not be allowed at a traditional public school, often with few or no avenues for recourse. And then there is the issue of the number of charter schools that close, often abruptly. In fact, about 25% of charter schools close within 5 years, leaving students and families without support and sometimes without information. And often for-profit management entities are based outside the bounds of federal oversight, not really the choice parents are looking for. Yes, parents should be able to decide the best way to educate their children. However, this should not come at the expense of a strong quality public education system that protects and supports every child. That's why I ask that committee members join me in supporting more magnet schools, schools that provide choice within the public school system and that come with accountability and non-discrimination. My home district in Beaverton, Oregon, for example, offers some very popular options: an arts magnet, a science and engineering magnet, an international magnet. So instead of proposing an 80% cut to the Title I program, my colleagues should invest in public education and evidence-based choice programs so every family can send their child to a high-quality, accountable, and safe public school. So thank you to our witnesses for being here, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8-C, our sub-C, all committee members who wish to insert written statements into the record may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically. You have to use Microsoft Word format to do it by 5 p.m. after 14 days from today's hearing, which is March 20th, 2024. And without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days after the date of this hearing to allow such statements and other extraneous material referenced during the hearing to be submitted for the official hearing record. I note for the record, the subcommittee, that some of our colleagues who are not permanent members of the committee may be waving on for the purpose of today's hearing. And now, I know you're wondering, how does our committee staff find foremost experts in the field? But once again, they've done so. They've traveled across the nation, and we've got some premier experts on charter schools. And once again, it's my pleasure to introduce today's all-star panel. Our first witness is Dr. Mackie Raymond, who is the founder and director of the Center for Research on Education Outcomes at Stanford University, located in Stanford, California. Dr. Raymond has served as the director of the center since its inception and has steered the group to national prominence as rigorous and independent source for policy and program analysis. She leads the center in investigating the effectiveness of public charter schools and has spearheaded several landmark studies on charters. Our next witness will be introduced by Ranking Member Bonamici. Ranking Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Julian Vasquez-Heilig is a founding board member of the Network for Public Education and an academic whose research focuses on K-12 education practices that impact equity and innovation. He previously served on the executive committee and as education chair for both Kentucky and California NAACP. Dr. Vasquez-Heilig received his PhD in educational administration and policy analysis and a master's degree in sociology from Stanford University. Kind of West Coast heavy here so far. He's also earned a master's degree in higher education and a bachelor's degree in history and psychology from the University of Michigan. Go Wolverines. Welcome, Dr. Vasquez-Heilig.
All right. Let's go to the East Coast, where our third witness is standing by to be introduced. Mr. Robert Pondiscio, who is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, located in Greenville, New York. Mr. Pondiscio is a senior fellow at the AEI, where he focuses on K-12 education, curriculum, teaching, school choice, and charter schooling. Before joining AEI, Mr. Pondicio was a policy analyst for education reform at the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, an education policy think tank. He worked previously for the Core, this is good, previously for the Core Knowledge Foundation as an advisor and civics teacher at Democracy Prep Public Schools, and then became interested in education policy issues where he started teaching 5th grade at a struggling South Bronx public school in 2002. We'll hear from him in just a moment, but our final witness is Mr. Kenneth Campbell, who is the CEO of New Schools for Baton Rouge, which is in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Previously, Mr. Campbell served as executive director for IDEA Public Schools of Southern Louisiana, president of the Black Alliance Educational Option, and as founding director of charter schools for the Louisiana Department of Education, where, in the years following Hurricane Katrina, he was responsible for rebuilding New Orleans' education infrastructure through high-quality charter schools. Mr. Campbell served 8 years of active military duty and 13 and a half years of reserves before retiring as a captain in 2005. Thank you for your service, Mr. Campbell. We thank all our witnesses, and we're eager to hear you. There's this one little rule that you need to know about, and it's the 5-minute rule. Everybody has 5 minutes. We do too. And so pursuant to committee rules, I'd ask each of you to limit your oral presentation. If you go over or get near, you'll hear this sound. That means to wrap it up. We appreciate you, but you can submit your written testimony as long as you want. I think we've all received their written testimony. And we also remind everybody that we have a duty to be responsible in the information that you provide to the subcommittee. With that, let's get to it. Dr. Raymond, you are, first of all, welcome. We're glad to have you here, and you are recognized. The floor is yours. Dr. Raymond, your mic, mine's clicking off too, but...
All right, starting
boom.
over, 0. Chairman Bean, Ranking Member Bonamici, and other members of the committee, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm joined by Dr. Wan-Fai Lee, a lead analyst of the study that I will discuss today. For over 2 decades, Credo has studied national charter schools and has produced 3 national studies of the academic progress in charter schools compared to carefully selected comparison students in nearby district schools, in partnership with 29 states of the District of Columbia. By the time I saw the results of our 3rd analysis in early 2023, we had waited 10 years to solve a mystery. But to tell you more, I need to frame the results in the context of the 2 prior studies. In 2009, our study showed charter students learning less than their district peers in both reading and math by a statistically significant amount. Using a comparison standard of 180 days of learning in a typical district year of 180 days of schooling, charter students only had 174 days of learning in math and 163 days of learning in, 174 in reading and 163 in math. In 2013, the second study showed improvements across the sector, posting a positive advantage of 6 extra days in learning and reading, and breaking even with district students in math. As everyone knows, 2 points make a line, but they do not make a trend. And so the latest results from 2023 were keenly anticipated. Our findings showed charter school students had 16 more days of learning in reading and 6 additional days of learning in math than similar peers in local district schools, and both comparisons were statistically significant. I'll return to this trend later. Good results for charter school students were even more pronounced for urban students, for Black and Hispanic students, for low-income students, and students served by charter school networks. For each of these groups, attending charter schools led to more learning in a year's time compared to peers in adjacent district schools. Not all the results in the National Charter School Study 3 were positive. The learning for rural charter school students is not strong, and special education students in charter schools also lagged the learning of their peers in district schools. And while comparative progress of Black and Hispanic charter school students is positive compared to their district counterparts, both sets of students learn substantially less than their white peers on average. Targeted improvement would benefit all of the groups I've just mentioned. The study revealed insights about charter school networks, also called charter management organizations or CMOs. The average student in a charter school network gained more than a month of extra learning compared to their district school counterparts in both reading and math. More importantly, charter school networks do not sacrifice learning as they replicate and scale. The final set of results I want to mention are the so-called gap-busting schools. We looked for charter schools that had above-average achievement in their respective states. And of these, we subset schools that had learning for minority or poverty students that was at least as strong as the learning of their white or non-poverty charter school classmates. We found hundreds of schools who met the criteria. In fact, over 1,000 schools where Hispanic students exceeded the progress of their white classmates. Moreover, we found dozens of charter networks able to produce these impressive results across their entire networks. The implications from the National Charter School Study 3 are important and timely. Millions of charter school students have been well served, adding to their education progress and their life outcomes. The charter school community also delivered many examples of successful schools and showed that scaling successful models is now common. These examples hold promise for adding more charter schools and for fulfilling their charge to be laboratories of new and now proven ideas. The long-term trend of these 3 studies shows especially what legislators like of this committee are able to do to devise policy levers to create good outcomes. The charter school law pairs flexibility and accountability, and these forces produce incentives for continuous improvement that are readily apparent in the data we studied. We see thousands of schools getting a little bit better each year, which explains the upward trend line. The insight we think is welcome considering the general state of schools coming out of the pandemic. I will conclude with the idea that there are untapped opportunities for exporting successful models to other schools and for other laws to use similar incentives to prompt further improvements in our public school system. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Raymond. Well done. Next, let's go to Dr. Heilig. Dr. Heilig, thank you for coming today, and welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. I'm honored to contribute to this critical discussion on school choice, sharing insights from my multifaceted engagement with the charter school sector as a former charter school educator, donor, parent, board member, and now researcher. These experiences, combined with my academic inquiry, have provided me with a deep understanding of the nuances and complexities surrounding charter schools. In the late 1990s, my research into charter schools began in Michigan, a state at the forefront of the charter school movement. This journey continued through an instructional role at the Aspire Charter School in East Palo Alto, California, and as a board member of a charter school in Austin, Texas. Witnessing my daughter's education within a charter school further personalized my insights into the sector's impact on students and families. As a researcher and tenured scholar, I have published 28 peer-reviewed articles, reports, and law reviews and other publications on school choice. The foundational premise of charter schools was to foster innovation and provide an alternative that would spur improvements within the traditional public school system. Yet, the body of peer-reviewed academic research, including my own studies, increasingly questions the efficacy of charter schools in delivering on these promises. Data from the NCES indicates no significant academic advantage for charter school students over their public school counterparts. Furthermore, Credo series of ongoing reports have sometimes noted positive achievement results and other times they found negative results, often into hundreds of a standard deviation. Credo has also faced criticism for the methodology from the National Education Policy Center and the Network for Public Education, casting doubt on the significance and replicability of their days of learning framing of their findings. Beyond the question of academic outcomes, charter schools have been shown to exacerbate pre-existing challenges within the public education system. As noted by the 2016 resolution from the NAACP that came forward when I served as NAACP Education Chair in California, charter schools on average exhibit higher rates of teacher turnover, decreased teacher quality, serve less special needs students, and intensified racial segregation, and have exhibited inequitable disciplinary practices. The work of such scholars such as Kevin Wellner, among others, have illuminated how charter schools' selective recruitment and retention practices contribute to a deepening of educational disparities. My own research corroborates these findings, highlighting the troubling extent of racial segregation in charter schools and challenging the inclusivity and equity of the choice model. So here's the flip side. The issue of accountability or lack thereof in the charter sector is particularly alarming. The absence of rigorous oversight in many states has paved the way for financial mismanagement, conflicts of interest, and a disturbingly high rate of school closures. A recent study by NPE found that over 25% of charter schools close within 5 years. By year 10, the closure rate was 40%. Millions in public funds from the Department of Education have been spent on charter schools that either never opened after receiving those grants or closed within a year. These dynamics not only disrupt students' educational paths, but have resulted in documented misallocation of billions of dollars in public funds. The governance structure of many charter schools, especially those managed by for-profit entities, often fail to align with the broader community interests where they are located, undermining the principle of public accountability in education. Moreover, the unchecked expansion of the charter sector poses significant risk to the public education system because it dilutes resources and exacerbates the challenges of delivering a high-quality education in all sectors. The problem is accentuated by the expected nationwide decline of K-12 student populations in public schools, underscoring the urgency of focusing our efforts on improving existing infrastructure rather than expanding the charter sector indiscriminately. Given these concerns, my stance on charter schools has evolved towards a more cautious and critical perspective. While most have heard the original idea that charter schools would serve as laboratories for educational innovation and provide families with diverse options, it's imperative that we address the profound existing issues of accountability and financial management that currently beset the school choice movement. In consideration of the predominant perspective of educational research data, it is imperative that we unite in advocating for strategic reassessment of the charter school model, with a focus on upholding educational excellence, reinforcing our value of education as a public good, and enhancing communities' involvement in charter schools. Only through a concerted effort to confront and resolve these challenges can we ensure that charter schools will instead contribute positively rather than negatively to our collective goal of an effective education system for all students. It's my sincere hope that this testimony serves as a catalyst for thoughtful and comprehensive reevaluation of charter school landscape. I don't mean to be the skunk at the garden party, but may it ignite initiatives and policies aligned with our highest educational aspirations, guaranteeing every child access to a high-quality education that is emblematic of our nation's dedication to excellence in education for all children and families. Thank you for considering these perspectives on this critical issue.
Dr. Heilig, well done. Thank you very much. And I was following along because you have submitted your written testimony earlier. Mr. Pondizio, you are recognized. Welcome to the committee, and you got 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning.
And your mic needs to...
Thank you. Chairman Bean, Ranking Member Bonamici, and members of the committee, thank you for having me. My name is Robert Pondizio. I'm a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and a former teacher. In 2002, I became a fifth grade teacher at the lowest performing public school in the South Bronx, New York City's lowest performing school district. A mere 16% of PS 277 students could read at grade level. The first charter schools were just opening up in the neighborhood back then. There were virtually no alternatives to the schools that had failed children for decades. In my role at AEI, I study and write about education, including charter schools, but my focus has seldom strayed from the question that motivated me to become a teacher in the first place. How can we ensure that disadvantaged children in places like the South Bronx have every opportunity to succeed in school and in life? A few years ago, that very question took me back to the South Bronx, where I spent a year at a Success Academy charter school, literally across the street from where I'd been a student teacher and a few blocks from my old school. But this charter school was delivering astonishing results for children. In the years since I'd left my classroom, Success Academy had grown from a single school in nearby Harlem to 45 schools across New York City, educating 17,000 children. The lowest performing of those schools had 85% of its students pass the New York State English Language Arts test. That was the worst one. The Success Academy school with the lowest pass rate in math had 92% of its students at or above proficiency. The others were even better. Said differently, if Success Academy were a school district, it would be the highest scoring district in New York State. It gets better results than the city's gifted and talented programs, and better results than wealthy suburban districts with multi-million-dollar homes. And more than 90% of Success Academy students are children of color, mostly low-income, Black, and Hispanic. By comparison, only 1 in 3 Black and Hispanic children in New York City test at or above grade level in math and reading. I spent a year embedded at Success Academy Bronx 1, not as a teacher, but this time as a reporter and researcher, writing a book about the lessons that success might teach us that could be applied to K-12 education at large. After all, a founding ideal of the charter school movement was to serve as an engine of innovation and experimentation. I welcome the opportunity to discuss in detail what I observed, but in a sentence, what I saw is what is possible when you allow parents to select a high-functioning school and when every adult in a child's life, teachers and parents alike, is pulling in the same direction, just as has been demonstrated time and again in America's past. For years, I have applied what I call the Tiffany test to my work in education. It's named after a real-life student that I had when I taught 5th grade. You've heard of the expression, a problem child? Well, Tiffany was a not-your-problem child. She came to school every day in my 5th grade classroom in a spotless school uniform, never missed a day of school, never missed a homework assignment. She was hardworking and conscientious. Tiffany was solidly at grade level in a school where that was rare. I call her a not-your-problem child because one day I pointed out to my assistant principal that I wasn't doing very much to challenge Tiffany, this incredibly diligent, dutiful, perfectly behaved, and trusting kid who was deeply devoted to her school and her education. The assistant principal said something I'll never forget. She said, "She's not your problem." What she meant was, why are you worried about Tiffany? You've got kids who are far below grade level in reading and math. You've got behavior problems. You've got special needs kids. Who cares about Tiffany? She'll be fine. So reading and doing math at grade level is the starting line for my child and for yours. But it's the finish line for Tiffany and kids like her in America? No one would tell the parent or teacher of a well-off student, we've got bigger problems than your kid. She's doing well enough. But even in the most dysfunctional schools and classrooms in America, you'll find some number of diligent and hardworking kids whose parents believe in the promise of education, but whose teachers have bigger problems than the not-your-problem child. So the Tiffany test is simply this. There are parents and kids who demonstrate faith in education, in upward mobility, in the American dream. Are we doing all in our power to ensure that faith is rewarded? So 10 years later, what did I see at Success Academy? Tiffany, in nearly every seat. Tiffany or someone like her. It's commonly said in teaching that we should meet the children where they are. It's equally important, I believe, to have an education system that meets families where they are. There is no rational or moral reason for government policy at any level to prevent the children of motivated, engaged, and invested Americans of any race, ethnic group, or income level from reaping the full rewards of their talents and ambitions. There is no reason to interfere with parents' earnest efforts to do what is best for their children. I titled my book, How the Other Half Learns, and I chose that title, frankly, because I don't think I'm wrong or oversimplifying to suggest that if you're wealthy, you have every conceivable option available to you. If you are poor, Black, or brown, you get a lecture. You get hand-wringing over fairness. You're told to be patient. You're told your most promising student is not your problem. So public charter schools pass the Tiffany test. Thank you very much.
Mr. Pompicio, thank you very much and right on time. Our final witness who has given service to our country, thank you again, Mr. Kenneth Campbell from Louisiana. Welcome to the committee, and you are recognized.
Thank you. Good morning. Chairman Bean, Ranking Member Bonamici, and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to speak with you. My name is Kenneth Campbell, and I am the CEO of New Schools for Baton Rouge, a nonprofit founded in 2012 by civic and community leaders to transform public education in our city. Our core belief is that every child deserves a great school, and our mission is to ensure that every child has access to an excellent education. I've spent the past 30 years advocating for and working with educators, parents, and community leaders across the country to develop and implement thoughtful and impactful charter school policies and initiatives. In 2007, I was tapped by the Louisiana Department of Education to serve as the founding director of the State Charter School Office and to help lead efforts to rebuild New Orleans' education system following Hurricane Katrina. We did it by empowering local educators to restart their schools as charter schools so that they would have the autonomy to make the best decisions for students. Before Katrina, New Orleans was the second lowest performing school district in Louisiana, with a graduation rate of less than 60%. Recent studies now say that New Orleans, an all-charter district, has one of the highest academic growth rates of any urban school district in the country. And as CEO of New Schools for Baton Rouge, my energy and efforts are focused on utilizing charter schools to drive the same type of improvement and innovation in Baton Rouge. Our work with charters is centered around two questions. First, are charter schools serving students and families well? And second, are they accelerating learning for our most vulnerable children? We believe the answer to both of those is a resounding yes. As with most school districts nationwide, Baton Rouge schools have struggled to recover from COVID. However, in the state's most recent performance evaluation, almost 70% of our charter schools surpassed their 2019 school performance scores, compared to less than 40% of the district's traditional schools. And almost 80% of charter schools in our city improved their performance year over year. Not surprisingly, this academic success and innovation are driving greater demand. We're celebrating 30 years of chartering in Louisiana this year. We have 87,000 kids in charter schools in Louisiana. And in Baton Rouge, almost 30% of students who attend a public school attend a charter school. And that tells us that moms, dads, grandparents continue to seek out new and better schools for their kids, and we should be in the business of trying to help them do that. Charter schools serve as catalysts for educational innovation. Belle Chase Academy, just south of New Orleans, was the nation's first charter school on a military base. It was founded to meet the unique needs of military children. We have 2 charter schools in our city that partner with large healthcare centers and hospitals to collaborate on academic resources and opportunities in STEM education. GEO, Next Generation High School, is committed to ensuring that every student graduates from high school having also earned an associate's degree. Unfortunately, as has been mentioned here a couple of times today, not every charter school is successful. In fact, accountability is a cornerstone of the charter school model. Unlike traditional public schools, when charter schools are not performing up to standards, they can be closed. And while the decision to close any school is regrettable, we must be committed to evaluating performance and, when necessary, making the difficult decision to redirect resources to schools that better serve students and our community's needs. Earlier, I spoke about the growth of charter schools in Louisiana and across the country. And while local leaders deserve all of the credit for the hard work of planning and launching schools, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the key role that the charter school program has played in the growth and expansion of charter schools over the past 25 years. We're deeply appreciative that Congress continues to allocate resources to the charter school program, and we hope that charter schools continue to enjoy strong bipartisan support. I also want to acknowledge Congresswoman Letlow and Senator Cassidy, both from the great state of Louisiana, for partnering with colleagues in their respective chambers to introduce legislation to help charter schools solve 2 of the biggest hurdles: access to facilities and resources to help educators and community leaders strengthen their charter applications. Charter schools provide viable options for families and students who want more from their public schools. They empower families with the ability to choose the school that best fits their child's needs. They engage communities with a sense of ownership and pride. There is no question that our public education system is struggling, and I believe charter schools can be important collaborators with school districts to develop programs and services that improve all public schools for all students. Again, thank you for this opportunity to speak, and thank you for recognizing the vital role that charter schools play in the education of our students.
Mr. Campbell, thank you so much. Leave it to the military man to finish early and give us time back. Thank you so much. Under Committee Rule 9, we will now question witnesses under the 5-minute rule. I will begin the question. Put the clock on, Bean, as we embark. Y'all did a great job, by the way. Thank you all for coming forward. Mr. Pondiscio, you've got unique perspective because you were a teacher in a public school and now you've been involved in a charter school. Is it possible for you to tell us what's the difference? What's the secret? What's the secret sauce in charter schools and the difference?
Yeah, I was a teacher at a public school and at a charter school. I taught high school civics for a time at Democracy Prep public charter schools in Harlem, New York. The difference is, and look, let me be clear, I don't think there's any particular magic that happens when you put the name charter on a school building. What it is a permission structure, right? Chartering allows you to innovate, allows you to do something new and different that you couldn't do in the public school system. Some charters take full advantage of that, some do not, let's be honest. But the best charters embrace this and innovate around curriculum and instruction, which is my particular interest. And some of the very best charters think thoughtfully about the job of the teacher and making, how do you make that job, as I like to say, doable by mere mortals? As a former public school teacher, I can tell you that it is, I like to say it is the easiest job in the world to do badly, the hardest job in the world to do well. So one of the things that I've studied over the years, particularly in charters, particularly like the one that I referenced in my testimony, is innovative ideas around making the job doable by the teachers we have, not the teachers we wish we had.
Were you coached differently as the administration
no
at one or
question.
the other?
Well, back to my experience as a charter school teacher, I got more observations and coaching on a single day than, frankly, I got in 5 years at PS 277, where I had 2 observations in 5 years. I don't mean 2 a year, 2 observations, period, in 5 years. In my first day teaching high school civics at Democracy Prep, my principal was in my classroom giving me feedback.
Good deal.
But if I may complete
hopefully,
with-
I got to move on, but hopefully we'll explore that because I know you've had that insight right there. Dr. Raymond, we've heard we all want what's best for kids. We all want a system that thrives. We want an accountable system. We want to be measuring everybody's report card. All report cards should be the same because we can measure. There's been some criticism on charters today that we don't measure them appropriately and whatnot. How do you respond to that criticism? Is that fair?
I think that all schools should face the same outcomes performance criteria, and I think if we do that, you will find, as Mr. Pondisio said, some charter schools don't do very well, but the vast majority of them do. And so those sets of criteria should apply regardless, and they ought to be tied to our learning standards that we think kids need to know in order to be successful in life.
Is the Credo measuring stick, and that's the measuring stick of how we, based on educational outcomes, is that fair? Is that need to be reformed? Is it accurate?
Well, if we thought it was unfair, we would change it. No, the idea that we have is that we have precisely matched on all things that we can measure a student in a charter school with students who look exactly like them, including their starting score, so their educational endowments, in local district schools. And so it's a peer-reviewed methodology. We've had 4 published critiques, evaluations of our methodology, and not only do we hold up well as a regular matching methodology, but our results actually approximate what you would get with so-called experimental designs. I'm confident it's useful.
Thank you very much. Mr. Campbell.
Yes, sir.
You've got a distinguished career as a military veteran, but also as a business leader. You could do a lot of things, probably go elsewhere and make a lot of money, but you've made a decision to engage in bolstering charter schools and educational choice. Why are you doing that?
It's very simple. I mean, just the hundreds and hundreds of families, parents that I've talked to. I've been in living rooms where I've heard them talk about the challenges of getting a great education. I've heard them share their hopes, their wishes, their dreams, their aspirations for their kids that they felt like were being unmet. And so anything I can do to help them do that, I think that's the most important work and work that I will always look back upon fondly. So if I could help parents be able to do that, that's what I'm going to do.
Was my opening statement accurate when I said there's a lottery, there's lines to get in, families literally live on that computer trying to get in. They know that sometimes it's the only way they can get out. They can elevate their family. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it is in some cases. That is absolutely accurate in some cases. In others, the reality is that, if we do this well, our schools will be better and also traditional public schools will be better. And so my hope, again, is that we have great charter schools. They push our district in ways that they might not always want to be pushed, but that they get better also, and that we have a variety of offerings that parents, especially those parents who have limited means, can be able to access those schools.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. I now yield the floor to Ranking Member Bonamici for 5 minutes. You're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. I'd like to start by reiterating that research on charter schools is mixed at best when it comes to determining their effectiveness at providing high-quality academic instruction for students. And additionally, research has shown that charter schools are less likely than traditional public schools to enroll and support students with disabilities, more likely to be segregated by race, socioeconomic status, class, and student language proficiency. I think, Dr. Raymond, you made a great case for a longer school year. Mr. Padicio, you certainly made a case for more professional development and differentiation, a great case for smaller class sizes and more engaged administration. But I see our role as policymakers to care about all students, not just with those students with the parents who say, okay, well, we want to find a right fit for our students, because you still have to look at everybody and give everybody a great education. So when I was in the Oregon legislature, I was on a charter review commission where we looked at, it was 10 years after our charter law passed, and we were grappling with issues back then. This was maybe 12, 15 years ago. A lot of questions that still haven't been answered today. How are charter schools determining which students enroll? Who serves on boards? To whom are they accountable? What happens when charter schools close? Where do their students go? We had a lot of questions about the proliferation of online charter schools, which tend to have an abysmal record. So Dr. Vasquez-Heilig, you mentioned the lack of accountability and rigorous oversight of charter schools in many states, and also the high percentage of schools that close. So what do students and families do when their charter school closes its doors? What recourse is there? What options do they have? If a charter school closes in the middle of an academic year, how does that affect the local public schools?
Yeah, so I have to work in an example about the University of Michigan. So I can want to go to the University of Michigan, but the University of Michigan also wants to have me too. And I think that's one of the issues that we have with charter schools is we talk about lotteries and these types of things, but the charter schools get to decide who's eligible for that lottery in a lot of cases, right? And if those students leave, then they're able to backfill those students, and they can decide how they want to backfill students when students leave, et cetera. And so when charter schools close, we know that public schools are going to welcome them back, because public schools are a part of education as a public good. And so they're going to bring any student that comes to their door, they're going to allow them in. And so we have to understand the school choice doesn't mean that parents can willy-nilly choose the school they want to go to. They also have to be chosen by that school, and it's the same premise for vouchers too. So whether it's charters or vouchers, school choice means that the schools have a role in that choice. And so if a charter school is closed, and we know that quite a few charter schools do close, I gave those numbers in my opening statement, that disrupts their education, that disrupts their families. And so those students are welcomed back with open arms to their public schools. But they do also have a lot of other opportunities for choice. Many districts have in-district charters. Those are community-engaged charters. There's magnet schools. There's community schools. Right. There's a lot of community-driven choice.
Thank you. I'm going to get another question in. So, like many other states, Oregon's witnessed a proliferation of online charter schools, as I mentioned. In 2015, a Credo report about online charter schools found such poor performance that Education Week actually quoted Dr. Raymond as saying it was literally as though the student did not go to school for the entire year. So despite this enrollment, we know that they've long been some of the worst performing schools in the charter sector. There was a rise, of course, during the COVID-19 pandemic, and 2022 GAO report found that virtual charter schools had significantly lower proficiency rates on state tests compared with other school types. So what are the long-term outcomes for students who attend these schools, and what, if anything, can we do to hold online charter schools accountable for poor performance?
Right. So I think that Credo has been very consistent in finding that the online charters perform especially poorly, especially in math. That they've been performing very poorly. And when I was in California as education chair, this was something that California was tackling. And so this is one of the biggest challenges in the charter sector. And I think it's in the best interest of the charter sector to support accountability, because then their numbers would look better than hundreds of standard deviation of improvement. So I think it's in their best interest for the good apples to call out the bad apples.
I appreciate that. And
can I clarify
I want to
for the
know if there's
record?
some. Go ahead, Dr. Raymond.
So the numbers that you've quoted are accurate, but of just a few weeks ago, our team, in part led by Dr. Lee behind me, published a policy brief about online charter schools. I would be happy to enter that into the record during the follow-on period. And what we found is that in most online charter schools, while the average performance is bad, and that's certainly the case, there are in every school a substantial proportion of students who do well. And the problem that I see now in this additional insight is that Online schools are not for every student. They don't
Correct.
have the necessary
And
clearing and
I have to
matching.
reclaim my time. There are also significant equity issues for students who don't have a parent or someone at home with them. Mr. Chairman, as I yield back, I want to enter into the record a letter by the National Network for Public Education about charter schools, and enter into the record as well a report by the National Council on Disability entitled Choice and Vouchers Implications for Students with Disabilities.
Without objection, so ordered. Thank you
Yield
very much, Ranking Member. We'll now yield to the state of Michigan, where Representative Lisa McLean is recognized for her 5 minutes. Representative McLean, you're recognized.
Thank you. And before I get started, Ms. Raymond, did you want to finish your thought?
I was done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then I'll start just with a general question to Mr. Healig, because we've talked a lot about charter schools and what happens if they close, and we're all concerned about that, right? Goodness gracious, what happens if they close in the middle of a school year, right? We want to make sure that we're protecting the children. What happens when a public school fails?
Well, that's a good question. How do you define failing, Congresswoman?
Same way we define failure for charter schools.
I'm
So
gonna-
what happens, it's real simple. One, do you have a determination whether a public school is failing, yes or no? Yes, you do?
Well, I was asked to do that work for Rod Page when I worked in Houston. Did you want me to say more on that or just leave it?
I'm just asking, do we have a measurement for when a public school fails? Yes, we do, no, we don't.
Bureaucrats do create arbitrary measures for failing schools,
So
yes.
yes, we have that measure for when public schools fail?
Yes, bureaucrats
Thank
do
you.
create that
Okay,
line,
yes.
yes.
Okay, I appreciate that. So what happens to a public school when it fails?
Well, we should make investments in the
I'm not
things.
asking what should, I'm asking, when a public school fails, what happens?
Well, I can tell you what happens in Texas. In Houston, they've gone and taken away the schools from the community. That's what's happening in Houston. But I think that we need to make investments in the things that we know matter.
I understand. When a public school fails, this is where I'm trying to wrap my head around.
Sure.
We have two separate sets of rules for the same children, which is kind of interesting to me.
Okay.
If a charter school fails, we have all these rules and regulations and it closes, right? And if a public school fails with less rules, less regulations, we just want more money to fix the problem. So if money is the answer for public schools, why wouldn't we give money to the answer for charter schools? So with that, I'm going to switch my questioning now to Mr. Ponsidio. The National School of Choice Awareness Foundation January survey found that 72% of parents considered different schools for their children. A 35% increase since 2022, right? What do you see is driving such a significant increase in school of choice? 35%.
Yeah, I think the short answer may be COVID. For years, I have pointed out that what happens inside of the American school classroom is a bit of a black box. We don't really know. COVID ripped the lid off of that black box, as it were, so suddenly your child's school was coming onto your laptop, onto your kitchen table every day all across America. In many and hopefully most instances, parents were edified by what they saw. In some number of cases, unfortunately, parents were aghast at what they saw. And when parents are unhappy with their school, they tend to want something else. And if they are in a public school that is not doing well, then they're going to seek choice. Congressman, if I also may just answer your previous question about what happens when a public school fails. Well, in 2002, I went to work at the lowest performing public school in New York City's lowest performing district. It is now 2024. That school is now the lowest performing school in New York City's lowest performing district.
But we just have measurements. I thought we just talked about we had measurements for those public schools and they close. Why didn't that one close?
That's a very good question, Congressman.
Do we have, that's interesting, but we care about the children, right? Okay, just checking. So in my district, over 3,300 we have 3,300 charter school students, right? I'm wondering if you could help, but there's a need, there's a want, maybe not a need, but a want for more charter schools, right? There's a waiting list to get in, right? Which I would think would be a good thing. Can you describe the roadblocks that exist at the local and state level in developing more options?
Sure.
Why can't we have more of these schools that parents are demanding for their children?
I understand that we're talking about this at the federal level, but in New York, where I've spent my entire education career, there has been a charter school cap in place for nearly a decade. So despite the fact that the city in particular, New York City, is home to some of the highest performing, highest demand public charter schools in the country, there has been no more room at the inn, so to speak. State lawmakers have blocked the creation of new charters.
Why do you think we're so afraid and so scared of charter schools?
That's a very good question. I don't have an answer for you.
With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the great state of Connecticut, where Representative Hayes is recognized. You're recognized.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. I just want to make a few corrections to the record before I get into my remarks. First of all, teaching virtually is a skill set. So this idea that people turned on their computers and were aghast by what they saw, many of our educators had never had the investments made in what it takes to teach students virtually, which is a different skill set. So for that to be the metric of evaluation for what is happening in our public schools is just wrong and inaccurate. Also, I'm not sure where in the country a teacher would only be evaluated 2 times in 5 years. Teacher evaluations are part of our school systems. I was evaluated every year, multiple times a year, on things like student learning objectives, standards-based observations, parent and peer feedback, whole school measures, and also student feedback. You cannot advance as a teacher and maintain your certification without evaluation. So that needs to be said. And there is already a partnership in place between parents and teachers. I have to shout out from my own home state of Connecticut, our PTA chairman, Joe Accomando, who is here in the galley today listening. Listen, I'm an educator, and I support school choice. And I support high-quality public charter schools. They are no exceptions. But I also recognize the importance of specialized learning, schools with a focus on a particular strand or a topic, because these schools can engage students in a very different way and help them to excel in their learning. But charter schools get to pick and choose if and when they will accept a special education population. They get to choose to exclude students based on disciplinary or attendance issues. Public schools cannot do that. We have to support all students, no matter what they bring to the table. Even the kids who have no one else advocating for them, even, to your point, the Tiffanys. That is our job, to support all students. So why then are we not talking about making all schools the best that they can be, instead of picking off and creating subsets where a select handpicked group of students have access to high-quality specialized learning? As a parent, I would expect that for my child, and I want that as a teacher for every child. So that should be our response. And I also do not support moving public funds from students who need it most to fund for-profit charter networks. The Department of Education invests millions of dollars in charter schools, so we must have transparency and oversight of these funds, and that is not unreasonable. And to my colleague's point, these are questions that for a decade still have not been answered. So Dr. Vasquez-Helig, in your testimony, you mentioned that charter schools have higher rates of teacher turnover and lower teacher quality than traditional public schools. Can I ask you why public schools are able to retain quality teachers at higher rates than most public charter schools?
That's a great question, and I think that there's a lot of peer-reviewed research on this topic. Charter teachers say it's because there's a lot of inexperienced teachers in charter schools. 1/5 of public school teachers have less than 3 years experience. 1/3 of charter school teachers have that experience. They also have a challenge with experienced leaders and working conditions. So right here in DC, 25% of teachers turn over in neighborhood public schools, 40% in charter schools, according to a Washington Post piece that I recently saw. So it's very well established in the research literature, on average, because we're talking about the averages here, that charter schools have less experienced teachers and they're less qualified and they have higher turnover.
According to the Network of Public Education, over 15% of charter schools around the country are run by for-profit corporations. Do you think that a mandatory spending report or other measures by Congress would help in providing transparency to where these funds are going?
We absolutely need more accountability. There was a comment about money for these planning grants. With the CSP grant, and I've been a CSP reviewer for the U.S. Department of Education, we've seen $1 billion go into planning grants for schools that either never opened or closed after a year. There is excessive malfeasance in terms of the finances in the charter school sector.
Thank you. I don't have much time, so I will end by thanking you all for your testimony and just reminding you that investing in our teachers and in our public schools is the way that we reach all students. This idea about picking out and pulling out the most egregious statistics about failing schools should be our call to action, not us turning away from the kids who need it most or the kids who have no one but us advocating for them. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative. Let's go to the great state of Illinois, where Representative Miller is recognized. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Chairman Bean, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Campbell,
Yes, ma'am.
you mentioned in your testimony that 67% of Baton Rouge charter schools are surpassing their pre-pandemic test scores. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Which is roughly double the percentage of traditional public schools in Baton Rouge achieving the same success. That number is simply remarkable. What do you think explains the charter school success in Baton Rouge?
I think several things. One, being able to be in that smaller environment where you're worried primarily about the kids in that building gives you a laser-like focus on those kids and their needs and their interest. When you have a school district and you're kind of worried about everybody and everything, it's kind of hard to forget about the one kid and what does that one kid need. I think charter schools being mission-aligned and mission-focused, really digging in on instruction and understanding, kind of what the learning loss during COVID entailed and how they can get past that. I think our schools have done a wonderful job. We have further to go by far. We want to be far better, but we're really encouraged that those schools are back to that level, and we think they could be even better next year. So that's what we're focusing on.
That's great. Mr. Campbell, I'm also deeply impressed by your dedicated service to our country, having served 8 years on active duty and an additional 13 years in the reserves. First and foremost, thank you so much for your commitment and sacrifice to preserve our freedom. Your contributions are truly commendable, and our nation is indebted to individuals like you. In your testimony, you highlighted the potential of charter schools in addressing the unique needs of military families. Could you elaborate on how charter schools can effectively cater to the specific needs of military families?
Yes, ma'am. First is knowing the kids. And, the reality is, our military families, especially in the post 9/11 era, they were facing frequent deployments. And so where family members were gone all the time, what does that mean to a kid who is in your school, to have a dad gone or a mom gone for an extended period of time? Frequent TDYs, the fact that they're moving every 2 to 3 years and they're in a different community with different friends, all those things affect kids and how they learn and their ability to be deeply connected to teachers and schools. And so a school that recognizes that and does little things, for example, when you walked into Belle Chase, shortly after 9/11, you would see banners hanging in the entryway with the names of every parent who was deployed, right? So that kids would walk through that on their way into school knowing that people cared about their family member, that they were praying for him and hoping for their success. The fact that these kids have to go on to different school districts and they need to be on grade level, all those sorts of things I think made a big difference to the families, just south of New Orleans. And I'm hoping that other schools can have also that laser-like focus on particular kids who go and enter their doors.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell, and may God continue to bless you and grant you wisdom as you seek to be impactful in these children's education. And Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative. Let's go to the great state of Florida, where Representative Wilson, you are recognized. Good morning.
Thank you, homeboy. Thank you, Chairman Bean, Ranking Member Bonamici, and thank you to our witnesses for your testimony today. I must state up front that I find your claims of charter schools outperforming public schools to be not only misleading, but entirely deceptive and unfounded. Charter schools have failed to uphold their promises to the communities they serve. A number of years ago, I became a public school teacher to keep the promise that traditional public schools make. My mission was clear: to provide Black and brown children with opportunities for life, knowledge, civic engagement, and the pursuit of the American dream. Charter schools fall short of this promise. Instead, poorly monitored charter schools deliver subpar academic results, snatch money from our public schools, and then wash their hands clean of any responsibility. On top of that, in my home state of Florida, we see charters exacerbate patterns of resegregation along racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic lines. In Florida, Black students consistently perform worse in charter schools than in their traditional public schools. And while Florida's charters boast more A-rated schools, they also lead the pack in F-rated institutions compared to public schools, and that's just the reality. In fact, in 2022, a News 4 Jax report revealed that 10 out of 40 Duval County charter schools receive D or F grades from the state. Does this sound consistently successful to you? Help me make sense of this. Again, the assertion that charters are best for minority, low-income communities is not just misleading, but downright dangerous and destined for failure. In a WTSP Tampa Bay report, Florida's charter school statistics paint a grim picture. A staggering 409 charter schools have shut down since the first opened in Florida in 1996. That is a 40% failure rate. So, as a former teacher and former principal myself, let's recap what we've learned. What are charter schools actually good at, if anything? We've learned that charter schools are good at snatching Florida's money that should be going to public schools, leaving them deprived. Then they peddle substandard education. And when the damage is done, they shut down and leave nothing but chaos in their wake. This is what we get with charter schools. We as a nation have worked very hard, made so many gains, and we simply cannot continue to regress into an educational landscape where we fail to keep the promises we made to our children. The very first charter school in the nation was established in my hometown of Florida, Miami, Florida, by Jeb Bush, who used that platform to win the governorship of Florida. After the school board, which I served on, passed the charter provision, despite my protest, I worked with Mr. Bush side by side to make sure that the school was at least halfway equal to our public schools. It was not, and it soon closed. Please stop diverting funds from public schools to experiment with our children. With that, I have a few questions. Dr. Vasquez, Heilig,
Yes,
data
ma'am.
is consistently showing that traditional public schools are increasing in performance over time. Meanwhile, charter schools have higher teacher turnover rates. Would it not make sense to invest in our traditional public school system rather than splintering our resources in a variety of school types?
Yes, and this is particularly important for the African American community. The NAACP has had 5 resolutions on charter schools, and the one about 2010 made exactly this point. And this is why the NAACP called for a moratorium on charter schools in 2016, and this is especially important because in urban areas, 1 in every 5 black students is now attending a charter school.
Out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Wilson. Let's go to Utah, where the chair of the Higher Ed Subcommittee is recognized. Burgess Owens. Representative Owens, you are recognized.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Herling, I'd like to ask you a quick question. Would you agree that, I guess what the question is, what is the priority of education, the child or the institution?
The priority of the education system should be to make the investments in our students so that they have successful futures.
Just is it the child? Is that the priority, or is the institution? Because 2 different focuses I think we're kind of dealing with right now.
Investments in the children.
Okay, child, okay. State of California, 2017, 75% of the black boys in the state of California could not pass standard reading and writing tests. Here in Baltimore, 3 districts, 0 proficiency in math. Should the parents of those children, well, let me also ask this. Would you agree the parents of these children care about their kids as much as everybody else, even though they're poor, black, Hispanic, they still care about those kids that are failing?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Would you agree that the parents of those children care about their kids as much as we do care about our kids?
Absolutely.
Okay. So in a situation where they're in these schools, should parents have a choice of leaving failing public schools to go someplace else?
So that is.
Can I just restate this? 75% of black boys in the state of California fail to read, write, and think. Should those parents have a choice of leaving those failing public schools to go someplace where their kids have a chance to succeed?
The question you asked has limited the responses I can provide. The response to the actual question is we need to make an investment in these children.
Well, let me just say this. If we were talking about your child, I'm sure you would say, I want to choose someplace else. I've been hearing this for 40 years, that we need to reinvest in these schools. Guess what happens? Every 3 to 4 years, kids are graduating not understanding how to succeed as we're talking about investing more into failing schools. Should public school systems have the same level playing field in terms of the outcome as charter schools?
Well, I think that the record should say that charter schools should have the same accountability. Public schools have vastly more accountability in state law than charter schools do.
Okay, well, so why are we having so much failure across our country?
Because
this is not just California, by the way. Everywhere, and by the way, let me just say this: it's happening more in Black, Hispanic, and low-income.
Yes.
This is going on.
Yes. Yes. So that's the elephant in the room in our country. We know that inequality is. $20 billion more go into districts that are primarily white compared to districts that are primarily black and Latino.
Well, let me say this. I know that charter schools are in the same communities as these public schools. So if you go to a charter school where you have a majority of black, Hispanic, and low income, you go to the same public school charter, you're going to have the same demographics.
Yes, but here's the answer. So here's the answer to that question. So if I go into your local supermarket and I have $10 and I have to split it 3 ways, that's completely different than if we invested in a public choice system.
Okay,
so if you have vouchers,
let me just say this because I don't want to get into too much of the weeds. I'm going to ask, and I look at this. The problem is accentuated, this is your statement, by a nationwide decline in K through 12 student populations in public schools. That could be because parents realizing it's not working for their kids. I think we have to understand this. How about if we look at best practices? If you thought about this, you look at what's going on in Baton Rouge. You look at what's going on in this Success Academy. If those are working, should we not replicate that if the focus is our kids?
Well, I think that's a great question. You know, we have a district in Louisiana that's all charter schools, and I don't think anybody's arguing that they're a model of educational success. After Katrina, charter schools were forced on New Orleans, and nobody's arguing that they're a beacon of educational success.
No, well, we can also not have to argue that there's 75% failure rate in California. So those public schools are failing too. My point is we should have a standard for all of them. If it's failing our kids, they should not be part of the equation, right? Would you agree with that?
I agree we should have a high standard for all schools, absolutely.
Okay, that means public schools also. If public schools are failing, let's get rid of them. If charter schools are failing, let's get rid of them. Our bottom line is our output of our kids being able to sit and have these kind of conversations, to have a dream, the ability to move forward, only happens if they can read, write, and think. And for us to talk about putting down the best practices of college, of situations that are working, I'm trying to understand why that's happening. If it's succeeding, if it's in Baton Rouge, it's succeeding, New York, I go to Success Academy, upstairs in the same building is where Success Academy is, downstairs is public. The biggest disappointment are those kids and the same families. One knows they're going to be succeeding because they're part of that lottery ticket, and the other one knows they're not going to succeed because they're going downstairs to a public school system that's going to guarantee their failure. We need to focus on our outcome, focus on our kids, not the institution. And thank you guys actually for what you're doing. I appreciate particularly those in these communities that these kids have not had a chance in the past. Thank you guys so much for that. And I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative Owens. Let's go to the great state of California, where the chair of the subcommittee of the workforce is recognized. Representative Kiley, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Campbell, I want to ask you about the New Orleans experience, because it's such an important case study that in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, you had to rebuild the whole education system. And New Orleans went 100% charter. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so what have the results been in terms of student achievement?
The results have been nothing short of remarkable. So as we said, it was virtually a wasteland. It was one of the worst school districts in America prior to Hurricane Katrina. And you look today and you actually see a vibrant school system. It actually works very well. And contrary to what a lot of people said, the folks who started schools after Hurricane Katrina were education leaders who were already from New Orleans. It wasn't like there was some invading force that came in with all these charter schools. The reality is we empowered local educators who were already there, already operating schools, with a new way to be able to do it, that they have embraced and ran with and done phenomenal things with. Right now, if you look at our state, New Orleans, again, was always at the bottom. It's in the top tier in terms of school district performance, in the top 40%. There's no way you would have expected that in New Orleans when you look at the demographics of New Orleans. And so we have veteran educators who love New Orleans, who have lived there their entire lives, who are running great charter schools. And if you ask them to a person, they will tell you they will never go back. That's the reality of what's happening in New Orleans.
So New Orleans went from among the worst to among the best after
Yes.
going 100% charter.
Yes.
And yet, we see in some parts of the country, charter schools are under attack. One of the first things that the Biden administration education department did was to propose cutting charter school grants. In California, a number of laws have been passed and signed into law by the governor, making it harder to open and to reauthorize charter schools. In Los Angeles Unified School District's second largest district in the entire country, they're proposing right now to significantly restrict the ability to operate charter schools. We've heard today several just blatantly false statements about how charter schools work from our friends over there, as well as one of the Democrat witness who just blatantly mischaracterized the New Orleans experience. So what would your message be to those who are waging this war on charter schools when they've been shown to produce such remarkable results?
I think the first thing we have to understand is this is really about money and control. Right? We can talk about all these other things, performance and all this. It is money and control. It is who gets to decide how kids are educated, where they're educated, and who gets to spend the money. And the fact is now we have a situation where all of a sudden it's not all housed in one district. There are other people who can say, this is how we're going to spend our dollars. These are the results we're trying to achieve. For the first time, we have empowered poor families to say, I don't like what's happening in this school, and so I'm going to take my money and I'm going to move and go somewhere else. So at the end of the day, as long as we're talking about money and power and control, you're always going to have this kind of contentiousness. But let's not make it something else. It really is about money and power and control and who has it and who doesn't.
So in other words, the attacks on charter schools are about putting politics over kids.
Absolutely.
Dr. Raymond, sorry, I wanted to ask you briefly about the Credo study, because this is really the gold standard when it comes to measuring charter school success. And I think you have results specifically for California as well, which is my state. Can you speak to that a little bit about how charters have done in California?
I knew I would get a detailed question. Hang on just a second. Yes, thank you. In our charter school study of 2023, students in California charter schools were able to post 11 extra days of learning in reading and math, 4 extra days of learning in math. These are 1,300 charter schools across the state, so on average, they are moving students forward faster than students in traditional public schools that are right down the street.
Isn't it interesting that the politicians in Sacramento see those results and decide these are precisely the schools that we need to go after and to target and make it more difficult to operate them? Thank you very much for your work, and thank you as well for your testimony, Mr. Campbell, and your work, the tremendous work that you're doing to provide opportunities to students. The beauty of charters is that not only are they helping to close achievement gaps in districts that have historically struggled when it comes to student success, but they also allow for just different options for different types of kids and different types of families. So in the area that I represent, we actually have some truly excellent traditional public schools, and then we also have some very outstanding charter public schools that some families choose to opt into. So I want to thank the chair for holding this hearing. I think it's very important that we continue to support the charter movement and to support successful charter schools and charter leaders. And I think it's highly unfortunate that that can't be as bipartisan as frankly it should be. Thank you, and I yield back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Chair Kiley. Let's go to the great state of North Carolina, where the chair of the Education and Workforce is standing by. She is now recognized for questions. Representative Fox, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Bean, and I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. Dr. Raymond, coming to you again. You mentioned that charter school results for students in urban areas and for minority students are especially positive. Could you say something more about that? I know you've done excellent research and have terrific numbers about this, so we'd love to hear more about that.
I love it when somebody asks me for more numbers. Thank you.
Will you turn your mic on? I'm not sure it's on.
Yes, ma'am, it is on. Can you hear me now?
Okay.
So urban students enrolled in charter schools learn an extra 30 days in a year's time in reading and 28 extra days of learning in math in a year's time compared to district students that they're matched with. For Black students, those numbers are 35 extra days of learning in reading and 29 extra days of learning in math. Hispanic students, reading 30 extra days in reading for Hispanic students and 19 extra days for Hispanic students in math. And the poverty results are 23 extra days of learning and reading and 17 extra days of learning in math. What this means is over a course of several years, students are making months and months and months of additional academic progress. This means they're better prepared to graduate. They're better prepared for life after high school.
Which makes it, again, even more puzzling as to why policymakers don't want these students to have these opportunities. It's just maddening. Mr. Pondicchio, in the last few years, we've seen parents in traditional public schools get silenced, excluded, and shamed for simply wanting to be part of their children's education. I think that's inexcusable. How can charter schools help ensure parents have a voice in their child's education?
The best schools, charter, public, private alike, recognize the power of getting every adult on the same page, so to speak, or pulling in the same direction. I think one of the potential benefits of charter schools is to encourage, again, innovation and create a wider variety, an ecosystem, if you like, of different school types. With respect to my research-based colleagues, I focus on curriculum, on instruction, on school culture. If you think of the choices that an affluent American parent has at his or her disposal, they depending on where they live, of course, they likely have access to a classical school, a Montessori school, a project-based learning school. They have, without controversy, unfettered access to make the best choice for his or her child. Imagine if we had a similar range of options for low-income families, where, and this should be the magic of chartering. And let's be honest, if there's a weak link in the charter ecosystem, it's that we are not encouraging this robust flowering of different school models and cultures. But if we use the chartering process to create an equal system, a system that was just as robust and diverse and had as many different options as well-off families have, well, then you would more likely match parents and children to schools that match their interests, their values, et cetera. So that I think is the promise of chartering that is unfulfilled, but it is fulfillable.
Thank you very much. Mr. Campbell,
Yes,
we've
ma'am.
heard a lot of concerns about how too much red tape can stifle charter school flexibility and growth. As someone who's been involved in charter schools for several years, what kind of regulations could be eliminated without compromising charter effectiveness?
Yeah, I honestly, ma'am, I don't know where to start, right? There are so many regulations, and I must say, this is not only the case for our charter schools, it's for traditional public schools also. Like, the amount of red tape that we throw at education is ridiculous. And I'll give you a really quick story. In Louisiana, we passed a bill several years ago that would allow every kid to get $1,000 in free tutoring. A report just came out last week that only 1% of eligible students were taking advantage of that. The reason was because we made the mandates for being a tutor so hard. Like, you had to be a retired teacher, you had to have so many hours of training, that we couldn't find enough teachers to do it. So across the board, we're always bringing in additional mandates. Cursive writing, you have to learn about this one little obscure thing. At the end of the day, let's set the outcomes and let's try to get out of the way. Let's take the handcuffs off. I mean, we certainly want to protect kids. We want to protect families. Those things are really important. But I would argue our whole system is overly burdened by regulatory red tape, and it certainly affects charters, which are supposed to be exempt from that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Chair Fox. Let's go to the great state of New York, where Representative Bowman is recognized. Good morning.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. Before I get into my questions, Dr. Vasquez-Heilig, is there anything you want to clarify based on questions you may have been asked before I arrived?
I'd like to clarify, there's a lot of conversation about why Credo's results are valid. I'm really surprised that they're spending so much time trying to convince us that they're valid, which to me tells a story. Now, one of the things about being at Stanford was I was subjected to a lot of statistical torture in my graduate program, and so I'd like to talk a little bit about Credo. Our understanding of that report, and only they really know, is that less than 40% of public school students are compared to more than 90% of charter school students. So it's not really a comparison of charter schools and neighborhood public schools. It's a very, and she said carefully selected, and I want to underline selected, because it's really narrow subject groups rather than actual samples. I think that's very important to say. I don't think that we should cherry pick results about educational outcomes. Also, they note in their report that they had issues with sampling, especially for Native American students and ELL students, sub 50%, and their ability to match in those areas. Also, she talked about CMOs, and they decided to omit several states that have CMOs, Ohio one of those, and 78% of the charters in Ohio are CMOs, and 1 of every 2 is for-profit. So I think it's important that I'm just really surprised that they spent a lot of time trying to justify their methodology, and I think that's because over the last 14 or 15 years that scholars have had lots of critiques of their methodology.
Thank you so much. As a former teacher, principal, and founder of a district-run public school across New York City, I've also seen countless examples of the ways that charter schools can negatively impact traditional public schools and often go against the wishes of local communities. Dr. Vasquez-Heilig, how do charters impact students and communities at traditional public schools, especially as it relates to things like funding, available space, and student enrollment? Can you say more about how, as you stated in your testimony, charters often fail to align with the broader community interests?
I think this is a very important point, and I was able to make it briefly to the other gentleman, because what's happening now is we are opening charters, we're offering opportunities of vouchers, et cetera, and now we're using the same educational dollars and we're funding 3 separate systems, which is a very inefficient way of going about public education. Now, we have examples from other countries. I'll give you an example of Chile. Chile is a place where they have universal choice. And what we see in those situations is that you have your great public schools in the nice neighborhoods, you have your other public schools where most of the lower achieving and low SES students go, and then you have some private schools where those voucher students go. So what these systems actually do is they promote stratification of students. You see less special ed students being served by charter schools, you see greater segregation. When we did our study study in segregation, we looked at every single school in NCES. We didn't say, here's 40% of neighborhood public schools, here's 95% of charter schools. We looked at every single school in the NCES data set and found that charters are more segregated. So I think it's very important that we are attentive to these critiques. And that's where the NAACP was coming from in 2016. There are significant critiques of charter schools, and I think charter school supporters could get a lot more people on board if they would actually address the critiques, and they haven't.
Thank you, and let's try to get this one in before time runs out. Can you also discuss in more detail the harsh discipline practices that exist more often in charter schools than in traditional public schools, and how these practices disproportionately impact marginalized students, including students with disabilities? I mean, I've seen kids thrown out of charter schools. Public schools can't do that. Kids suspended for long periods of times. Public schools can't do that. Can you say more about that, please?
Yes. I think the big picture is that it really disturbs me that we spin these sort of negative aspects of charter schools, that we need to have these harsh discipline, no excuses charter schools, that it's okay that charter schools close, that it's okay that we have lower quality teachers. That's spin. But for me, as a former charter school instructor, I think of Gary. He reminded me a lot of myself, and I don't want to cry here, but he reminded me a lot of myself. He got into a little bit of trouble now and then, but one day he got into a little bit too much trouble, and the charter school kicked him out. And I came back one day and Gary wasn't there, and it broke my heart. So I just think about all the Garys out there who charter schools have decided that they don't want to serve, and they want to send them back to our neighborhood public schools.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative Bowman. Let's stay with the great state of New York, where Representative Williams is recognized. Welcome and good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. Thank you to all our witnesses for being here. I'm an advocate for school choice. I believe that parents, not bureaucrats, make the best decisions for their for their kids' success and particularly for their education. In my district, we're very fortunate to have some excellent public schools, and I commend those administrators and teachers and school boards that deliver excellence in their communities. But I also have excellent charter schools, and they are usually located in the most disadvantaged communities in my district. And they are also very successful. They are wonderfully diverse. They are skillfully led, and they are in great demand. In fact, right now there are 10 families waiting on a wait list just to get into kindergarten in their community charter school. And every year they have more applicants than seats available. Dr. Vasquez-Heilig, do you believe that charter schools cherry pick students to inflate positive academic results?
Well, I think that, I made a point earlier before you arrived, Congressperson.
It's a real easy question. Do you believe that charter schools cherry pick students?
They have the ability to do that, yes.
You believe they do?
They have the ability to do that if they so choose.
So you're on record for having said an option is that we can ban charter schools altogether in a September 2019 interview. Are you really considering banning all charter schools?
Well, I think that I don't think that we should ban all charter schools. I think all charter schools should be democratically accountable to the public.
Can you provide some context for me to understand your comment that an option is that we can ban charter schools altogether?
Yeah,
that sounds like banning charter schools. That's what it sounds like to me.
Great question. I don't know the context of the comment. Do you know where that comment was made?
They're your words. I assume that you meant them when you said them.
I don't know the context of the comments, but
it's always context.
But I do believe that all charters should be democratically accountable.
Okay. Isn't your whole mission really just to avoid direct competition to local public schools?
Well, I'm a scholar.
Isn't that really your mission?
Sorry. I'm a scholar, so my job is to call balls.
Scholars can have
my job is to
political
call balls
objectives.
and strikes.
Please don't interrupt me, sir. Thank you. Scholars can have political points of view, as we've all learned. I'm educated in engineering, and engineers have political opinions. And this is a very political issue. Isn't your whole mission simply to avoid direct competition to local public schools? Isn't that your mission?
No.
That's not your mission? You know, Mr. Campbell has pointed out that this is really about money, control, and power. Mr. Campbell, you made some very compelling statements there. What is a good reason to ban charter schools altogether?
Sir, I can see no good reason to ban charter schools altogether. They are viable, they are popular with our families, and they are doing well. There is no reason to ban charter schools.
Well, we have scholars who are saying that that is a viable option. What animates and motivates that point of view? I'm surprised to have heard it today.
I think sometimes there is a tendency to look at something that is not perfect and to try to equate something else to it, to try to compare and contrast. We've had conversations today, and I've heard people talk about stratified schools. Our public school systems are stratified today, right? The reason we have charter schools is to help those folks who are stuck where they are. And so, you know, again, it's not as if parents are leaving to go to charter schools because everything is perfect. They're leaving because of the challenges that are already there. Now, our public school system needs to be better. In our work in Baton Rouge, we support great schools regardless. Magnet, outside under a tree, whatever it is. If it works, we're for it. And the reality is that too many of our schools don't work, and we need more schools that do.
It just seems that, getting back to where I started, that putting power in the hands of parents and letting them choose, like in my community where they're on a wait list for these wonderfully diverse schools that achieve just remarkable results, not at the exclusion of public schools. We have excellent public schools as well that dot my landscape.
Yes.
And I'm proud of both.
Yeah.
But, this idea that to avoid direct competition in local schools and perhaps even ban charter schools altogether as a scholarly option is absurd. And I appreciate you all for testifying here today. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Williams. Let's go to the great state of Louisiana, where Representative Letlow is recognized. Good morning, and you're recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here, especially my fellow Louisianan, Mr. Ken Campbell from New Schools for Baton Rouge, for coming to testify in front of the subcommittee. I had previously visited Mr. Campbell's charter school operations and was so impressed by the educational innovation occurring at your schools and how they're meeting the students' needs and catering to their learning styles. And it's no secret that I am a strong supporter of charter schools, the Charter Schools program at the U.S. Department of Education. And in fact, last September, the Louisiana Department of Education was awarded $55.5 million in federal CSP grant to support Louisiana's charter school movement. So over 5 years, LDOE will support the addition of over 5,000 seats at 25 new, expanding, or replicating the charter schools primarily located in failing school districts, including in rural areas just like mine. I am thrilled this grant will benefit our state and ultimately our students. And as I've visited with the charter advocates, it's been increasingly clear how tedious and long the administrative process is for starting our new charters. And to address these concerns, last November, I introduced H.R. 6418, the Empowered Charter Schools Educators to Lead Act. It's a bipartisan bill which authorizes states who receive grants through the CSP to use a portion of their funding to support the application process and development of new charter schools. These planning awards will help support experienced educators with at least 5 years of school-based experience through the charter school application process and increase technical assistance opportunities for them, including locating and accessing a facility for their new school. And it's my hope the committee can consider my bill so it can ensure high-quality prospective charter school applicants have the tools and assistance they need to successfully complete the process. My question is to you, Mr. Campbell. Can you share your experience with this committee, including any red tape that you've encountered when opening new schools for Baton Rouge? And then secondly, how could access to a planning grant and increased technical assistance ease the way for additional charter schools to open in Louisiana and eventually across the country?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And so pleased to, kind of have you here and good to see you today. And for your piece of legislation. I think it's incredibly helpful. Starting a charter school is hard, as it should be. right? So I was the authorizer for the state of Louisiana. And I'm gonna tell you right now, to get over our bar to be able to start a school is incredibly hard. And the reason it's hard is because serving kids is hard. Like, this is not an easy endeavor. And so the hurdles that you have to overcome in order to be able to start a school are significant. And so with the CSP grant, we're able to solve part of the challenge. We're able to get them money between the time their applications are approved and the time their school opens. Hire teachers, buy curriculum, furniture, all those sorts of things. And that's a wonderful use of the program. The reality, however, is that I think stronger schools are made in the planning process. And so if we're able to get some money to educators sooner, to help strengthen their applications and their planning, it would be remarkable. So for example, if you decided that you wanted to start a school for girls in STEM education, you might want to go visit 2 or 3 of those schools and take some people with you from around the country to see them. Which ones are succeeding? Why are they successful? What's working really well? These funds would allow you to be able to do stuff like that. The budget, the finance piece, there's been a lot of talk about charters struggling with finance, and I think that's a real thing. Be able to get real support of people to help you put together a budget that is conservative, realistic, that allows your school to get started and be successful will be tremendously helpful. That is not a skill that everybody has. And so things we can do to help strengthen planning, to help strengthen the applications, I think will lead to stronger schools. And it's one piece that has been missing, and I'm really encouraged about the possibility of being able to make that happen.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all that you're doing for Louisiana. You're changing the landscape of our state and eventually the country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative Letlow. Let's go to the Commonwealth of Virginia, where the ranking member of the education workforce is standing by. Representative Bobby Scott, you are recognized. Good morning.
Thank you, and good morning. We've heard a lot about questions about what happens when a school is failing. Just want to remind people that we updated the law in the Every Student Succeeds Act to require that the lowest performing schools receive additional supports as a solution of addressing failing schools. Dr. Valix-Helig, can you say a word about what sense it makes as a solution to a failing school to let a few students slip out the back door?
Thank you so much. I'd like to answer your question and also correct the record on two places. The congressman dropped it and said that I had called for a ban, but that was related to California's ban on for-profit schools. I just did a quick Google on that. So yes, I do believe that we shouldn't have for-profit charter schools. So I want to make that clarification. I think the second thing about the New Orleans conversation, we looked at the ACT, SAT data, the NAEP data, and Louisiana RSD has been last and nearly last for quite some time. I don't believe that deserved accolades. If there are new data that I haven't seen since I published that brief, I'm very open to seeing those New Orleans data. And then finally, I think it's very important that we serve all students that come to our door. And that's what's great about public schools. And I understand the concerns about failing schools and the
well, if you have a failing school, letting a few people slip out the back door, those that have figured out what's going on, leaving everybody else in the failing school, that doesn't sound like much of a solution at all. And in fact, if you have a failing school, all of them want to choose to leave. Then what happens?
Yeah, and not every parent has the option to take their kid all the way across a city or a neighborhood to a charter school that doesn't provide transportation. There are a lot of limitations to what parents are able to do. And so it's in our best interest to have in the neighborhood a strong public school and surround.
So the solution would be to improve the school, not let a few people slip out the back door.
Yes.
Let me ask you another question. I have limited time.
Yes.
You mentioned on school choice that it's not the student but the school that's choosing, instead eligible for lottery. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been to KIPP schools where they outline who's eligible for their lottery. Now, I'm not saying that all public schools cream and crop students, and so in the research literature, you can look at Kevin Wellner's work. There's a variety of ways that students are creamed and cropped. And I won't go deeply into that, but there's well-established research on how charter schools can change their populations, which makes the analyses that Credo do very, very difficult because it biases their selective sample.
Well, even with all that bias, some charters are obviously better than others. On average, are charters better or worse than public schools?
And I don't think that that conversation can be limited to just test scores, because most of the research that Credo does, they take very small standard deviations and the hundreds of standard deviation and create these days of learning. But we also need to look at teacher quality and teacher turnover and discipline and suspension rates. We can't just look at one outcome.
What is the effect of teacher quality, pay, and experience, turnover of teachers in charter schools?
Yeah, so we've looked at the success of teachers in terms of teacher quality. When you have a stronger teacher, it means better student achievement. There's been folks that have looked at, well, is it okay if we have great teachers come in and they leave very quickly? There's very little research that establishes that's a good idea.
Well, do charter schools have better pay, turnover, and experience for teachers, or worse than public schools?
They have worse turnover, worse teacher quality, in some cases better pay.
Can you say a brief word about the disciplinary policies? If a kid gets expelled from a charter school, where do they go?
Sure. Well, they're going to have to go back to their neighborhood public school. And charters in many states can reject students because of prior disciplinary issues.
Dr. Campbell, the city of Baton Rouge got significant funding under the American Rescue Plan Act. Do you know what the public schools did with that money, that they were able to do because of that money to address learning loss?
Sir, first of all, it's Mr. Campbell. Don't confuse me with the good folks down here. I think much of that funding went into real high quality interventions for kids. We rapidly expanding or greatly expanded high dosage tutoring for students, which I think is very powerful. We increased the number of math and literacy coaches in our schools. We were able to use some of that funding to expand early childhood education. So I do think that in the state of Louisiana, the city of Baton Rouge, rescue funds have been used by things that have made a difference for kids.
Did it make a difference?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Ranking Member Scott, thank you very much. We're nearing the end of our journey, but before we adjourn, let's yield to the Ranking Member Bonamici for her final thoughts.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses. It's been an important discussion today. Every student deserves a high-quality education that will prepare them for success. But as we've heard, not all charter schools provide students with a quality education, and when we consider all students, nor do they deliver the same educational outcomes that our traditional public schools could. Certainly, they are not a panacea for the challenges facing students today. And as we heard, poorly regulated charter schools often have poor academic outcomes and leave students with no recourse when their rights are violated. And I want to follow up on Ranking Member Scott's comments about the conversation and the questions regarding so-called failing schools. As we know, under No Child Left Behind, a failing school was a term used to describe schools where the students had lower test scores. And as those of us who were here in 2015 and worked on the Every Student Succeeds Act, as Ranking Member Scott clarified, we ask those questions. What does that mean to have low test scores? Maybe we need to ask a question. What does that school need? Why are the students not getting higher test scores? And in fact, we changed that so that no longer are test scores used as punitive measures to label schools as failing. We put in the Every Student Succeeds Act that those schools should probably have more resources, right? Because why are the students failing? Do they need smaller classes? Is there lead in the water? Are they hungry? All those questions, where do we put the resources to help every student? So I wanted to point that out because the term failing schools is really one where we have to question a school is a building. What is happening with the students inside of it? I also want to take strong exception to the suggestion that this is about money. I find that personally offensive as a member of Congress, as someone who cares deeply about every student, to suggest that I might have questions about charter schools because of money. We care not only about the students whose parents say, wow, I need to look at a charter school option for my child. We care also about the students whose parents are maybe a single parent household. Maybe they're stressed. Maybe they don't know about other options. Maybe they don't know how to get involved. And to say that we only care about this and that we want to provide a good education to those who want to leave the traditional public schools, I find to be inappropriate, and I just want to get that on the record that we should be here. We care about every student, want every student to have a good education, and calling for unchecked expanded access to charter schools that lack meaningful accountability while continuing to underfund our already overwhelmed traditional public education system is not in the best interest of students, it's not in the best interest of parents, and it's certainly not in the best interest for the future and for our economy. So I know on my side of the aisle, we'll continue to fight for a strong quality public education system that protects and supports every child, not just those with involved parents who are looking for an alternative. We don't, as Ranking Member Scott said, we don't want to just leave everybody else behind. We need to say, what can we do to give them a great education? So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield the back, and thank you. I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Bonamici. Here are my 4 takeaways. 1, charter schools have high levels of academic achievement, and as we've heard during this hearing, charter students, on average, learn more reading and math than their peers in traditional public schools. The fact is especially important when we know parents across the country are looking for better academic options. Number 2, charter schools are open to innovation, as Robert pointed out. Innovation is there. We've heard testimony that charter school autonomy can enable teachers to pioneer fresh teaching methods, encourage schools to develop better personnel practices, and equip schools to innovate in curriculum. All this can happen because charter schools aren't burdened by the regulations and contracts that restrict traditional public schools. 3, charter schools can provide a lifeline, as Mr. Campbell pointed out, to the most disadvantaged students. While there are some traditional public schools that provide a good education, we know that many students sometimes can be trapped when it's not the best option for them. We should keep trying to improve public schools, but we're going to try to improve charter schools too. We realize that charters can provide a vital lifeline to students where there are no other good options. Everyone benefits when families have high quality educational opportunities to choose from. And 4, I've got 3 kids. They all learn differently. Every kid is different. And so to give them just one choice, I think is not the best way to go. Everybody learns different, and maybe it's a charter school, maybe it's the public school, maybe it's a magnet school, maybe homeschooling. I don't know, but everybody's different. We recognize that, and I think that's what we recognize today. Finally, to our witnesses, let me tell you what I did. You saw me. I promised a very innovative, invigorating, robust discussion. I did set the bar high for you, but let me tell you what you did. You exceeded expectations. Thank you so much for participating. This continues, as Ranking Member Bonamici said, we will continue this conversation as we embark on a journey to make American schools the best they possibly can be. With that, there's no further...
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Ranking Member Scott, you are recognized.
You notice consent request that enter into the record a letter from the Network for Public Education about charter schools and a report by the National Council on Disability entitled Choice and Vouchers, Implications for Students with Disabilities.
Without objection, so ordered, and thank you so much. There being no further business to come before the committee, we stand adjourned. Members.